They burned a waitress's skin for fun, just because they could. In a small southern diner, laughter echoed as she screamed in pain, and nobody stopped them, until one quiet stranger walked in and changed everything. He wasn't just another customer, he was a billionaire with a past tied to that very town, and a reason to never forgive it. When he bought the diner overnight and fired everyone involved, the whole town exploded in fury. But what started as justice soon became something deeper. Whispers spread, rumors twisted the truth, and the waitress who once prayed for mercy suddenly found herself caught in a storm she never asked for. Because this man's kindness hides a secret, and his enemies are ready to destroy them both. In a place built on cruelty and silence, can one act of compassion heal what hatred burned? Or will the truth buried beneath the ashes tear them apart before mercy can rise again? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The fluorescent lights of Maggie's place buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow across the worn linoleum floor. Renee Johnson's feet ached in her sensible white shoes as she moved between tables, her steps careful and measured despite her exhaustion. 29 years of life had taught her to keep moving, no matter how tired she felt. The late-night crowd was thinning out. Old Mr. Peterson tipped his baseball cap as he shuffled towards the door, leaving behind his usual $3 tip and empty coffee cup. Mrs. Martinez gathered her knitting, offering Renee a sympathetic smile. They were the regulars she could count on, kind faces in a long shift. But then there were the others. The corner booth erupted in laughter again, making Renee's shoulders tense. 4 men in expensive suits occupied the space like they owned it, sprawled across the red vinyl seats. Their ties hung loose around their necks, and empty beer bottles cluttered the table. Travis McCade, the ringleader, sat facing the room like it was his personal stage. "Hey, sweetheart," Travis called out, his voice carrying that edge that made Renee's stomach clench. "More coffee over here, and try not to stumble this time. We all know how clumsy you can be." His friends snickered, and Renee felt her cheeks burn. She'd been their entertainment for weeks now, ever since Travis's father, the mayor, had started holding late-night meetings at the country club, sending his son and his friends to kill time at the diner. "Yes, sir," Renee replied quietly, reaching for the coffee pot with hands that trembled slightly. She could feel their eyes on her as she approached, watching the way her sleeve pulled back to reveal the old burn scars that mottled her dark skin. "What happened there anyway?" one of the men asked, pointing at her arm. "Kitchen accident? Guess some people just aren't cut out for the service industry." More laughter. Renee kept her eyes down, focusing on pouring the coffee. She'd learned long ago that responding only made things worse. The coffee steam rose in delicate spirals, and she took comfort in its familiar scent. Just as she was finishing Travis's cup, he shifted suddenly, bumping her elbow. The scalding liquid splashed across her forearm, and Renee couldn't hold back her gasp of pain. The coffee pot clattered against the table as she stumbled backward. "Oops," Travis said, his face a mask of mock concern. "My bad." His friends roared with laughter as angry red patches bloomed across Renee's skin. "Is there a problem here?" Sarah, the night manager, appeared beside them, her thin lips pressed into a disapproving line. But she wasn't looking at Travis. Her sharp gaze was fixed on Renee. "No, ma'am," Renee managed, cradling her burned arm. I need to clean this up." "Well, do it quickly," Sarah snapped. "And try not to cause any more scenes. These gentlemen are valued customers." Tears pricked at Renee's eyes as she hurried to the back, grabbing a handful of paper towels. The burn throbbed, a familiar pain that brought back memories she'd rather forget. Through the kitchen window, she could see their reflection in the darkness outside. 4 men laughing. Travis demonstrating how he'd accidentally bumped her, his friends slapping the table in appreciation. Only one person wasn't laughing. In the far corner, a man sat alone, his storm-grey eyes watching the scene unfold over the rim of his coffee cup. He'd been there for hours, quiet and still, like a shadow in the fluorescent glare. Something in his gaze made Renee think he'd seen more than most. The rest of her shift passed in a blur of pain and humiliation. When she finally clocked out at 2 a.m, her arm was still burning. The night air felt cool against her skin as she climbed the metal stairs to her tiny apartment above Lou's laundromat. Inside, the space was small but clean. Her grandmother had taught her that poverty was no excuse for disorder. The single window looked out over the parking lot, where the neon sign of Maggie's place still flickered in the distance, a constant reminder of her circumstances. Renee ran cool water over her arm, watching the angry red marks begin to blister. In the bathroom mirror, her reflection looked tired. Dark circles under her eyes, her black hair pulled back in a practical bun, her uniform slightly coffee-stained. She closed her eyes, remembering her grandmother's words. "Prayer ain't just for Sundays, child. Sometimes it's all we got." "Lord," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the running water. "I know you got bigger things to worry about than me. But if you could just give me the strength to keep going." She trailed off, not sure how to ask for what she really needed. A car engine rumbled outside her window. Through the thin curtain, she could see a dark sedan moving slowly past, its headlights cutting through the night. The driver was just visible, the same quiet man from the diner, his profile illuminated by the flickering neon sign as he drove past. For a moment, their eyes met through the window, and Renee felt something shift in the air, like the pause before a storm breaks. Then he was gone, leaving only the humming neon and the distant sound of traffic on the highway. Renee wrapped her arm in a cool, damp cloth and sank onto her narrow bed. Tomorrow would be another day of the same, serving coffee, dodging cruel jokes, trying to keep her dignity intact. But tonight, in the quiet of her apartment, she allowed herself to cry, tears falling silently as the neon light pulsed outside her window, marking time in red and blue flashes. The sound of washing machines churning below provided a steady rhythm to her thoughts, a mechanical lullaby that had become familiar over the years. It reminded her of her grandmother's humming as she'd treated Renee's first burns, gentle hands applying salve and whispering prayers. Now, alone in her apartment, Renee could almost hear that old voice saying, "Ain't no shame in hurting, baby. The shame is in letting them take your light." She changed into her nightclothes carefully, wincing as the fabric brushed against her burned skin. The small kitchen clock showed 3:15 in the morning, and she had to be back at work by 11. Another short night, another long day ahead. But as she lay in bed, her arm throbbing, Renee found herself thinking about the stranger with the storm-grey eyes, wondering why he'd driven past her window, why he'd watched the scene in the diner with such intensity. The neon light continued its rhythm outside, painting patterns on her ceiling. Red, blue, darkness. Red, blue, darkness. Like a heartbeat, like a promise, like a warning. Renee pulled her thin blanket up to her chin and tried to sleep, knowing that tomorrow would bring what it would bring, and she would face it as she always had, one moment at a time, with whatever grace she could muster. Morning crept through Renee's thin curtains, painting stripes of pale light across her small bedroom. Her arm throbbed with a dull, insistent pain that had kept her tossing and turning most of the night. The skin was an angry red, with small blisters dotting the surface where the scalding coffee had made contact. She sat up slowly, wincing as the movement pulled at her tender flesh. The clock on her bedside table read 9:45 in the morning. Barely 6 hours of fitful sleep. The familiar sounds of washing machines whirred below, a constant backdrop to her life above Lou's laundromat. "Lord, give me strength," she whispered, her grandmother's go-to prayer falling from her lips as naturally as breathing. Standing before her mirror, Renee carefully applied antibiotic cream to the burn, trying not to think about facing another shift at Maggie's place. The walk to work felt longer than usual, each step heavy with dread. When she pushed open the glass door at 10:45, the usual breakfast crowd chatter died down to whispers. She could feel their eyes following her as she made her way to the break room. "Did you hear what happened last night? Those McCade boys. Poor thing." The fragments of conversation floated around her like falling leaves. Mabel Thompson, the head cook, caught her eye through the service window. The older woman's face was creased with concern, her usually quick hands pausing over the grill. "You okay, sugar?" she called out softly. Renee managed a small nod, tying her apron with trembling fingers. The fabric brushed against her burned arm, and she bit her lip to keep from wincing. The morning rush would start soon. She needed to focus on work, not pain. The bell above the door chimed at exactly 11:15, and Renee's heart skipped a beat. The stranger from last night walked in, his storm-grey eyes scanning the diner before settling on her. In the morning light, she could see him more clearly. Tall and broad-shouldered, dressed simply in dark jeans and a grey button-down shirt. He carried himself with quiet authority, like someone used to being listened to. He chose a seat at the counter, directly in her section. Renee approached, pen poised over her order pad, trying to keep her hand steady. "Good morning," she said, proud that her voice didn't shake. "What can I get for you?" His eyes met hers, and she saw something there. Not pity, but understanding. "2 eggs over easy, wheat toast, black coffee," he said, his voice low and measured. "And my name is Daniel Mercer." She wrote down his order, oddly comforted by the simplicity of the interaction. When she returned with his coffee, he thanked her quietly, his manner courteous but reserved. Unlike the other customers, he didn't stare at her arm or whisper behind his menu. The morning crowd thinned out gradually, leaving only a few regulars nursing their coffee cups. Daniel Mercer finished his breakfast in silence, leaving an envelope on the counter before walking out. The bell chimed his departure. Renee stared at the envelope, her heart pounding. With shaking fingers, she picked it up and slipped it into her apron pocket, waiting until she could duck into the break room to open it. Inside, she found 10 crisp $100 bills and a handwritten note on thick cream-colored paper. No one should ever treat another human this way. The money trembled in her hands. $1,000, more than 2 weeks' wages. Tears pricked at her eyes as relief and uncertainty warred in her chest. Should she return it? Could she afford to? The break room door creaked open, and Mabel stepped in, her lined face serious. "Sit down, baby," she said, pulling out a chair. "We need to talk." Renee sank into the chair, still clutching the envelope. Mabel settled across from her, hands folded on the scratched break room table. "Those boys who hurt you last night?" Mabel's voice was low and urgent. "That was Travis McCade and his crowd. Mayor Henry McCade's son and his friends. They practically own this town." The words settled like stones in Renee's stomach. Mayor McCade's name carried weight in their small community. His family had held power for generations. "If you're thinking of reporting what happened—" Mabel hesitated, her eyes sad. "Well, I've seen how these things go. People who cross the McCades tend to lose their jobs, their apartments, everything." Renee's fingers tightened around the envelope. "So I'm just supposed to let them treat people like this?" "I'm just saying be careful, sugar. Some fights you can't win alone." Mabel reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "And you need this job. We both know that." The afternoon dragged on, each hour marked by the steady tick of the diner clock and the growing ache in Renee's arm. She served plates, filled coffee cups, and tried to smile through the pain, but her thoughts kept returning to the envelope in her pocket and Daniel Mercer's quiet presence. That evening, in her small apartment, Renee knelt beside her bed just as her grandmother had taught her. The envelope lay on her bedside table, its contents still untouched. "Lord," she whispered into the growing darkness, "are you still seeing me? Still watching over me?" Her voice cracked. "Because I could really use some guidance right now." Thunder rolled in the distance, low and ominous, echoing across the night sky. The sound seemed to shake the very foundations of her tiny apartment, vibrating through her bones like a warning, or perhaps a promise. The next morning dawned grey and humid, typical for an Alabama summer. Renee arrived early at Maggie's place, hoping the quiet would help settle her nerves. She'd barely unlocked the front door when a cherry-red Cadillac screeched into the parking lot, tires spitting gravel. Mr. Peterson, the diner's owner, burst through the door like a hurricane. His round face was flushed scarlet, and sweat darkened the collar of his golf shirt. "Where's Jim?" he bellowed, referring to the manager. "Somebody better tell me what's going on." The commotion drew the kitchen staff from their morning prep. Mabel poked her head out from behind the grill, spatula in hand. 3 other waitresses huddled by the coffee station, whispering. "I just got a call from my lawyer," Mr. Peterson continued, waving a wrinkled paper. "Someone bought my diner, overnight, just like that." He snapped his fingers for emphasis, the sound sharp in the tense air. Before anyone could respond, the bell above the door chimed. Daniel Mercer walked in, dressed in a charcoal suit that somehow made him look even more imposing. The diner fell silent. "Mr. Peterson," Daniel said, his voice steady and firm. "I apologize for the early hour, but I thought we should discuss the changes in person." Mr. Peterson's face grew even redder. "Changes? You can't just waltz in here and—" "Actually, I can." Daniel's tone remained calm but left no room for argument. "The paperwork is complete and legal. Maggie's place is now under new management." The kitchen staff exchanged wide-eyed looks. Renee gripped the edge of the counter, her legs suddenly weak. Behind her, the first few customers of the day trickled in, sensing the tension but settling into their usual booths anyway. Jim, the manager, chose that moment to arrive. He stopped short at the scene before him, his usual smug expression faltering. Daniel turned to face him. "Mr. Harrison?" he said. "I've reviewed the security footage from last night, and the nights before that." Jim's face went pale. "I don't know what you're talking about. You allowed customers to assault your staff." Daniel's voice could have frozen summer heat. "You watched it happen. Multiple times. Pack your things. You're fired." The diner erupted in whispers. Jim opened his mouth to protest, but Daniel held up a hand. "Security will escort you out if necessary." As if on cue, 2 men in dark suits appeared in the doorway. Jim's shoulders slumped. He turned and shuffled to his office, the security team following. Daniel then faced the growing crowd of customers and staff. "I want to make something clear," he announced. "This establishment will be run differently from now on. Every person who walks through that door, customer or employee, will be treated with dignity and respect." He turned to Renee, who felt rooted to the spot under his direct gaze. "Ms. Johnson, I owe you a public apology. What happened to you here was inexcusable. It will never happen again." Heat rushed to Renee's cheeks as every eye in the diner turned to her. Some faces showed sympathy, others curiosity, and a few, the regular mourning crowd who'd witnessed past incidents, showed shame. The bell chimed again. Travis McCade swaggered in, flanked by his usual crowd of friends. Their laughter died when they saw Daniel. Well, well, Travis sneered, though his confidence seemed forced. Looks like somebody's playing hero. Daniel didn't even blink. He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out several envelopes. These are for you and your friends, Mr. McCade. He held them out. Legal notice. I'm pressing charges for assault, harassment, and civil rights violations. Travis's face twisted with rage. You can't, your father's position won't help you this time. Daniel's voice carried across the now silent diner. The evidence is quite clear. Security footage, witness statements, medical records. Take the envelope, Travis. One of Travis's friends grabbed his arm as he took a step forward. Come on, man, he muttered. Not here. Travis snatched the envelopes, his hands shaking with fury. You'll regret this. He spat, but his voice cracked. He spun on his heel and stormed out, his friends trailing behind. The news spread through town like wildfire. All day, people streamed in and out of the diner, some to gawk, others to offer support. Mabel's face glowed with satisfaction as she worked the grill. The other waitresses walked taller, smiled more freely. When evening came, Daniel announced they'd close early. As the last customer left, Renee found herself alone with him under the humming neon sign. The mist was rolling in, turning the parking lot lights into soft halos. Why? She asked, finally voicing the question that had burned in her mind all day. Why would you do all this for a stranger? Daniel was quiet for a long moment, his eyes focused on something distant. When he spoke, his voice was softer than she'd heard it all day. Because I once had a mother who worked behind a counter just like this. The words hung in the misty air between them. Before Renee could respond, he turned and walked to his car, a modest sedan that seemed at odds with his obvious wealth. She watched until his tail lights disappeared into the fog, leaving her alone with her thoughts and the steady buzz of the neon sign overhead. The diner stood silent behind her, its windows dark but somehow more welcoming than they'd ever been. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, she knew, but for the first time in a long while, she felt something that felt surprisingly like hope. Dawn painted the Alabama sky in soft pinks and golds as Renee pulled up to the diner. She stopped short at the sight of a handwritten sign taped to the front door. The familiar cursive caught her eye. Under new ownership, Mercy Cafe, opening soon. Her bandaged arm throbbed as she reached for the door handle. Inside, drop cloths covered the floors, and the smell of fresh paint filled the air. Daniel stood near the counter, sleeves rolled up, studying a set of blueprints spread across the surface. Good morning, he said without looking up. Hope you don't mind getting your hands dirty today. Renee smiled, picking up a paint roller. Never been afraid of hard work. Throughout the morning, more staff arrived. Mabel bustled in wearing old jeans instead of her usual cook's uniform, her grey hair tucked under a bandana. She whistled at the sight of Daniel carefully painting trim work. Well, would you look at that? She chuckled. Angels must wear suits now, though I see you've traded yours in for work clothes today. Daniel's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. The suit wouldn't survive the paint, Ms. Thompson. It's Mabel, sugar. And speaking of survival, she nodded toward Renee, who was wincing as she reached up with her injured arm. Girl, you need to take it easy with those burns. I'm fine, Renee insisted, but Daniel was already crossing the room. Here, he said quietly, taking the roller from her. Let me get the high spots. As they worked, Daniel explained his vision for the place. It won't just be a diner anymore, he said, voice warm with purpose. We're making it a community cafe. Veterans will get half-price meals, single mothers too. That's mighty generous, Mabel remarked, pausing in her work. But can you make any money that way? Money isn't the point. Daniel's eyes took on a far-away look. Some things matter more. By mid-morning, whispers and speculation filled the small town. People drove by slowly, craning their necks to peek through the windows. Some stopped to take pictures with their phones. "Did you hear?" Renee overheard one woman say to another outside. "That stranger bought Maggie's place just to stop those McCade boys from causing trouble." "Well, I think it's wonderful," her companion replied. "About time somebody stood up to that family." But not everyone shared that view. "Outsider needs to mind his own business." An older man grumbled as he passed. Things were fine the way they were. Around noon, the bell above the door chimed. Constance McCade stood in the entrance, elegant in a pale blue suit that probably cost more than Renee made in 3 months. The mayor's wife surveyed the renovation work with thinly veiled disgust. "Mr. Mercer," she said, her voice honey-coated steel, "I believe we need to have a conversation." Daniel set down his paintbrush. "Mrs. McCade, what can I do for you? You can explain why you're disrupting our community." She stepped carefully around a drop cloth. "This isn't your playground, Mr. Mercer. You can't just waltz in here and start changing things." "I purchased this property legally," Daniel replied calmly. "The changes I'm making are well within my rights." "Rights?" Constance's laugh was brittle. "You clearly don't understand how things work here. This town has traditions, Mr. Mercer, hierarchies, natural orders that have served us well for generations." "If by served us well, you mean allowed certain people to abuse others without consequences, then yes, I'm changing things." Daniel's voice remained level, but his eyes hardened. "And I understand perfectly how things work here. That's exactly why I'm making these changes." Constance's perfectly painted smile faltered. "You're making enemies, Mr. Mercer. Powerful ones. I'm counting on it, Mrs. McCade." She drew herself up, frost practically crystallizing in the air around her. "You'll regret this interference." With that, she turned and clicked her way out on expensive heels. Mabel let out a low whistle. "Well, if you weren't in trouble before, Sugar, you sure are now." Work continued through the afternoon and into evening. As the sun set, most of the staff headed home, leaving Renee and Daniel alone in the transformed space. The walls gleamed with fresh paint in warm, welcoming tones. New curtains hung at the windows, and the booths had been reupholstered in soft burgundy. Daniel made them both coffee, and they sat at the counter in comfortable silence for a while. The coffee was better than anything the old diner had served, rich and fragrant. "I'm scared," Renee admitted finally, staring into her cup. "All this attention, people watching, talking. I've spent my whole life trying not to be noticed." Daniel nodded slowly. Being visible can be terrifying when you're used to hiding. "Why are you really doing all this?" She turned to look at him directly. "It can't just be about one incident with Travis McCade." "It's not." Daniel's fingers traced the rim of his coffee cup. "I'm not here for fame or attention, Renee. I'm here because justice matters, because dignity matters, because sometimes the only way to fight darkness is to shine a light so bright it can't hide anymore." Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden glow through the windows. Outside, the new sign had flickered to life for the first time. The words "Mercy Cafe" shone in warm gold letters, with "Hope Served Daily" beneath in elegant script. Renee stood and walked to the window, her reflection ghosting against the glass. The sign's light seemed to embrace the building, transforming the once shabby diner into something almost magical. "Hope Served Daily," she read aloud, tasting the words. "Do you believe it?" Daniel asked quietly. Renee watched cars slow down to look at the sign, saw people pointing and smiling. In the window's reflection, she could see Daniel waiting for her answer, his presence solid and reassuring behind her. "Yes," she said finally. "I think I do." The morning sun painted golden stripes across Mercy Cafe's freshly polished floors. Renee stood at the entrance, heart fluttering as she watched Daniel unlock the doors for their grand opening. The line of people waiting outside made her nervous. She'd never seen so many faces eager to enter the diner before. "Ready?" Daniel asked, his hand on the door. Renee smoothed her new uniform, a crisp burgundy apron over a white blouse. "As I'll ever be." The moment the doors opened, warmth and chatter flooded in. Veterans in well-worn caps claimed the counter seats, while young families filled the booths. The aroma of fresh coffee and warm bread wrapped around everything like a hug. "Welcome to Mercy Cafe." Renee greeted each table, her smile growing more natural with every passing hour. She watched in amazement as Daniel worked alongside them, rolling up his sleeves to bus tables and deliver plates. "Sir, you don't have to—" She started to protest when he grabbed a rag to wipe down a spill. "Please," he said with a quiet smile. "Just Daniel. And yes, I do." By lunchtime, word had spread about the free meals for veterans. Old Mr. Jenkins, who'd fought in Vietnam, kept wiping his eyes as he ate his burger. "Haven't had a proper meal like this in months," he whispered to Renee. The Montgomery Daily News reporter, Sarah Chen, sat in the corner booth taking notes and photos. Her article would appear the next morning. "Billionaire redeems small-town diner," splashed across the local section. The story detailed Daniel's background. Founder of Mercy Restored Foundation, worth over $3 billion, known for rebuilding communities affected by trauma. "Did you know?" Mabel whispered to Renee during a quiet moment. "All this time, we've had a real-life Bruce Wayne serving coffee." But not everyone shared the excitement. Renee noticed the hard stares from certain customers. The Hendersons, who'd been golfing buddies with the McCades for 20 years. Mrs. Patterson, whose husband served on the city council. They sat rigid in their seats, barely touching their food, watching everything with narrowed eyes. One woman, Renee recognized her as Travis McCade's aunt, loudly complained about her eggs being too runny. "Everything's changed," she announced to her companion, "and not for the better." Daniel handled each complaint with grace, offering replacements or refunds with the same calm smile he gave to everyone else. But Renee saw how he positioned himself between her and any hostile customers, as if he could shield her from their glares. The afternoon rush had just died down when Renee noticed an envelope tucked under the register. Inside was a handwritten note. "You're being used for a headline. Wake up before it's too late." Her hands trembled as she read it. The words seemed to dance mockingly on the paper. Who had left it? And why? "Everything okay?" Daniel's voice made her jump. She quickly stuffed the note in her pocket. "Fine," she said, forcing a smile. "Just tired." As closing time approached, Daniel insisted on walking her home. The evening air was soft with the remnants of summer, street lights casting long shadows across the sidewalk. "I still can't believe how many people came today," Renee said, trying to push the note's warning from her mind. "Success is the best revenge," Daniel replied, then laughed. "Though I have to apologize for that first pot of coffee I made. Pretty sure it could have stripped paint." Renee couldn't help giggling. "It wasn't that bad." "Mabel dumped it in a plant. The plant died." Their laughter echoed off the old brick buildings, making the night feel less dark. For a moment, Renee could almost forget about the note, about the angry stares, about everything except how nice it felt to walk and talk with someone who treated her like she mattered. Then she saw the truck. It idled at the corner ahead, headlights off. Even in the darkness, she recognized Travis McCade behind the wheel, his friends crowded in the cab with him. As she and Daniel passed, the headlights suddenly blazed to life, flooding them with harsh white light. Renee's step faltered. Daniel's hand found her elbow, steadying her, as Travis gunned the engine and roared past them. The truck's wake stirred up loose papers from the gutter, sending them spinning like angry ghosts in the night air. They were watching us, Renee whispered, hating how small her voice sounded. Yes. Daniel's jaw was tight. But they won't do anything. Not tonight. But the unease had already settled in her stomach, heavy as lead. The note in her pocket seemed to burn against her skin. You're being used for a headline. As they reached her apartment building, she couldn't shake the feeling that the day's joy had been too good to be true, like a dream she'd soon wake from. Thank you, she said at her door, meaning for more than just the walk home. Daniel nodded, his eyes scanning the shadows around them. Get some rest. Tomorrow's another big day. Renee watched him walk away, noticed how he checked the street in both directions before getting into his car. Only when his taillights had disappeared around the corner did she unlock her door and step inside, where the darkness waited with all its questions. The morning sun painted golden stripes across Mercy Cafe's freshly polished counters. Renee watched as Daniel mounted a large cork board near the entrance, carefully arranging colourful pins and blank note cards beside it. What's this for? She asked, balancing a coffee pot in her good hand. It's a meal forward board, he explained, stepping back to examine his work. Customers can prepay for meals, pin up a note, and anyone who needs food but can't afford it can take a card and redeem it. No questions asked. Within hours, the board bloomed with dozens of bright pins, each holding a promise of kindness. Breakfast for a family in need. Hot lunch for a veteran. Coffee and pie for a senior citizen. The sight made Renee's heart swell. Mrs. Jenkins, an elderly regular who lived on a fixed income, shed tears when Renee explained she could have a hot meal thanks to someone else's generosity. I haven't had restaurant food in months, she whispered, clutching Renee's hand. God bless you all. Mabel worked the grill with renewed energy, singing old gospel songs as she cooked double portions for struggling families. Now this, she declared, sliding a loaded plate across the counter, is what serving means. But paradise had its serpents. Renee noticed the whispers first, how conversations would stop when she approached certain tables, how some of the waitstaff exchanged knowing looks when Daniel spoke to her. Did you see his hand on her shoulder? She overheard Jenny, a new hire, muttering in the break room. Dating the boss? That's how you get ahead these days. The words stung like acid. Renee threw herself into work, trying to ignore the sidelong glances and raised eyebrows. She kept her interactions with Daniel strictly professional, even as her heart ached at the growing distance between them. One afternoon, she found Mabel angrily scrubbing already clean pots in the kitchen. You hear what they're saying? Mabel demanded, not looking up. About you and him? Yes, Renee admitted quietly. Mabel slammed a pot down. Don't you let them steal your joy, girl. People always want to dirty up something clean. They're just jealous because that man sees your worth. But Daniel had noticed too. His warm smiles became careful nods. He stopped joining her for coffee breaks, kept their conversations brief and businesslike. The space between them grew thick with unspoken words. The rain started just before closing, time one evening, drumming against the windows as the last customers hurried out. Renee was wiping down tables when Daniel emerged from his office, looking troubled. Can we talk? He asked softly. They sat at the counter, 2 cups of coffee steaming between them. Outside, the storm painted wet streaks across the glowing Mercy Cafe sign. I need to tell you something, Daniel began, his fingers tracing the rim of his cup. About why I'm really here. Renee's heart skipped. Okay. 30 years ago, this place wasn't Maggie's. It was called Linda's Corner Cafe. His voice grew distant, lost in memory. My mother worked here, Linda Mercer. She was a lot like you, actually. Kind, hard-working, always looking out for others. The rain seemed to fall harder, creating a cocoon of sound around them. There was a fire, he continued. A grease fire in the kitchen. The safety equipment was outdated. The extinguisher system hadn't been maintained in years. The McCades owned it then too. His knuckles went white around his cup. She didn't make it out. Oh, Daniel! Renee breathed, her own scars seeming to burn in sympathy. I was 14. They ruled it an accident, buried the safety violations in paperwork. Henry McCade was already climbing the political ladder. Couldn't let a waitress's death derail that. Bitterness crept into his voice. I left town as soon as I could, built the foundation, helped other people rebuild their lives. But this place, this debt, it waited. He looked up, meeting her eyes. I didn't come back for revenge, Renee. I came back because every person who walks through that door deserves dignity, deserves safety, deserves to be seen. His voice softened. Like you. Renee felt tears spill down her cheeks. Without thinking, she reached across the counter, laying her scarred hand over his. They sat in understanding silence, two souls marked by different fires, but burning with the same light. The coffee machine hummed quietly behind them, its gentle warmth a reminder of how things had changed. Through the windows, the rain continued to fall, washing away the old and making room for something new to grow. Thank you, Renee whispered, for trusting me with this. Daniel's hand turned beneath hers, their fingers intertwining. No more words were needed. Their scars spoke a language all their own. They stood together in the dim light of the closed cafe, listening to the storm and feeling the weight of shared truth between them. The coffee machine's soft clicks marked time as they remained there, neither willing to break the moment's fragile peace. Dawn had barely touched the horizon when the first news van pulled into Mercy Cafe's parking lot. Its satellite dish stretched toward the sky like a metal flower seeking light. By 7 o'clock in the morning, the lot resembled a circus. Camera crews adjusting equipment, reporters in pressed suits checking their makeup in car mirrors, and curious onlookers gathering at the edges. Renee noticed the commotion as she walked to work. Her steps slowed, stomach tightening at the sight of so many strangers. A reporter spotted her, and suddenly microphones sprouted in her path like strange metal weeds. Miss Johnson, can you comment on your relationship with Daniel Mercer? Is it true you're part of his PR campaign? How long have you been working with Mercy Restored Foundation? The questions hit her like hail. Confused and overwhelmed, Renee pushed through the crowd, her hands shaking as she fumbled with the diner's back door key. Inside, she found Mabel already at the grill, her face dark with concern. You seen it yet? Mabel asked, thrusting her phone toward Renee. The screen showed a social media post gone viral. There was a photo, Renee and Daniel in the kitchen 2 days ago, during the lunch rush. She remembered the moment. The kitchen had been sweltering, and Daniel had been helping plate meals, sweat on his brow. Without thinking, she'd grabbed a clean towel and dabbed his forehead. It had been a simple gesture, human and unplanned. But the caption beneath the photo twisted everything. Billionaire's latest PR stunt. Small-town waitress becomes prop in corporate image makeover. Sources say Daniel Mercer orchestrated assault incident to launch rebranding campaign. Renee's legs went weak. She sank into a chair, reading comments that painted her as either a schemer or a victim, but never as herself. Never as just Renee. Who would do this? She whispered. The morning crowd started filtering in despite the media circus outside. Renee moved through her duties mechanically, trying to ignore the cameras pressing against the windows. Every time the door opened, another reporter tried to slip in, only to be firmly escorted out by Mabel or one of the regular customers. At 10 o'clock, the mayor's press conference aired on the diner's television. Henry McCade stood at City Hall, his face grave with manufactured concern. "As mayor of this fine community," he intoned, "I cannot stand by while our citizens are exploited for corporate gain. Daniel Mercer may have billions, but he can't buy our dignity. This calculated manipulation of a vulnerable member of our community—" Renee couldn't bear to hear more. She fled to the kitchen, but even there she couldn't escape. Staff members whispered, their eyes following her. The weight of judgment pressed down like a physical thing. Around noon, Mabel burst through the kitchen doors, her face flushed with anger. "I found out who took that picture," she announced. It was Tina. Overheard her on the phone bragging about how much they paid her. Tina Moore, the new waitress who'd been so friendly, who'd asked to shadow Renee during training. The betrayal felt like a knife between her ribs. Daniel arrived shortly after, looking exhausted but composed. Reports swarmed him, but he moved through them with quiet dignity. Inside, he gathered the staff. "I know today is difficult," he began. "But I want to be clear. I'm not here to create headlines. I'm here because this place matters, because every person who walks through those doors matters." His eyes found Renee's. Truth stands taller than rumor. But it was too much. The cameras, the whispers, the betrayal. It all crashed over Renee like a wave. She thought of her grandmother's warnings about being too trusting, about how the world would always try to shame people like them. Had she been naive to believe things could change? "I can't!" she choked out. "I can't do this!" She untied her apron with trembling fingers, let it fall to the floor. Tears blurred her vision as she walked out, ignoring the calls behind her, pushing past the reporters who surged forward with fresh questions. The walk home was endless. Every storefront window seemed to hold another television playing the mayor's accusations. Every passing car felt like it might hold another camera, another judgment. In her small apartment above the laundromat, Renee finally let herself break down. She sobbed until her throat hurt, until her pillow was wet with tears. The afternoon light faded to evening, and still she lay there, replaying every moment, every kindness Daniel had shown. Had it all been calculated? Had she been foolish to trust? Her phone buzzed with concerned messages from Mabel, but she couldn't bring herself to respond. Instead, she opened her laptop and searched for Linda Mercer's story. Old newspaper articles appeared about the fire, about safety violations that were never addressed, about a 14-year-old boy who lost everything. The articles painted a picture of a woman who, like Renee, had tried to bring light to dark places, who had served others until the very end, who had raised a son who grew up to build something called Mercy Restored Foundation. Outside her window, the Mercy Cafe sign glowed in the distance. Even from here, she could see its slight flicker, that same unsteady light that had drawn her attention that first night. It reminded her of her grandmother's words about faith, how it wasn't always steady, but it was always there, waiting to be found again. Fresh tears came, but these felt different. She curled up on her bed, watching that distant light until her eyes grew heavy. The sign's gentle pulse followed her into uneasy dreams, like a heartbeat trying to tell her something she wasn't ready to hear. 7 days crawled by like molasses in winter. The empty parking lot of Mercy Cafe cast long shadows in the morning sun, its windows dark and uninviting. A simple sign hung on the door, temporarily closed, protecting what matters. Inside her apartment, Renee watched another news segment about the Mercy Cafe scandal. Her phone had been buzzing non-stop with messages from concerned regulars and curious reporters. She'd stopped answering days ago. The knock at her door came just after 10 o'clock in the morning. Soft but determined. "Renee," Daniel's voice carried through the thin wood. "I brought some groceries. I know you haven't been out much." She pressed her forehead against the door, heart thumping. The plastic rustling of grocery bags filtered through. "I'm fine," she called back, hating how her voice cracked. "Please just go." A pause. "There's fresh bread from Martha's bakery, and that coffee you like from the corner store." Tears pricked at her eyes. Such simple kindness felt almost cruel now. "I can't," she whispered, more to herself than him. She heard him set the bags down. "I understand. They'll be right here if you change your mind." His footsteps faded down the stairs. Only when she was sure he was gone did she crack open the door, pulling the bags inside quickly. The bread was still warm. Downtown, Constance McCade held court at her weekly garden club meeting, her smile sharp as cut glass. "I hear he's already talking to buyers," she told her rapt audience. "These corporate types always run when things get messy. Mark my words, that diner will be torn down by Christmas." The whispers spread like wildfire through Montgomery's streets. Some blamed Renee for driving away their chance at change. Others called her brave for exposing Daniel's true nature. Neither felt like truth. 3 days later, yellow flyers appeared all over town. Town hall meeting, Old First Baptist Church, Thursday 7 p.m. The truth about Mercy Cafe. Renee's hands shook when she found one tucked under her door. She hadn't set foot in that church since her grandmother's funeral. Thursday evening came heavy with humidity. Renee slipped into the church hall last minute, choosing a back pew where shadows gathered beneath the stained glass windows. The place was packed. She recognized faces from the diner, from town council meetings, even Travis McCade and his friends lurking near the side door. Daniel stood at the front, looking smaller somehow under the towering windows. No podium, no presentation. Just a man in a simple blue shirt, hands clasped behind his back. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice steady but soft. "I owe this community the truth about why I'm here." The hall fell silent as he spoke about growing up poor in Montgomery, about his mother Linda working double shifts at the old diner, how she'd complained about the faulty wiring, the ancient grease traps, how the owners, the McCades, had ignored every warning. "The fire started at 2:17 in the afternoon," he said, emotion finally cracking through. "My mother got everyone else out, but when she went back for Jimmy, the old dishwasher who was hard of hearing..." He swallowed hard. "The roof collapsed. I was 14 years old watching from across the street." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Even Travis McCade looked down at his feet. "I built Mercy Restored Foundation with her insurance money. Started small, helping burn victims, supporting worker safety programs. It grew beyond my wildest dreams." He smiled sadly. "But I never forgot this place. Coming back wasn't about revenge. It was about finishing what my mother started, creating a safe place where everyone is treated with dignity." He turned toward where Renee sat, though she knew he couldn't see her clearly in the shadows. "I owe a special apology to Renee Johnson. My actions, though well-intentioned, brought unwanted attention and pain to someone who deserves only kindness. I'm deeply sorry for that." The silence held for a long moment. Then old Mr. Peterson, a veteran who came to the diner every morning, stood up shakily. "Son," he said, voice gruff with emotion, "that cafe of yours is the first place in 30 years that's treated me like a human being instead of a burden. Don't you dare apologize for that." Others began standing too. Martha from the bakery, Coach Williams from the high school, even Tina, the waitress who'd leaked the photo, tears streaming down her face as she begged forgiveness. Renee's feet moved before her mind caught up. She walked down the center aisle, every eye turning to her. Daniel watched her approach, his expression open and vulnerable. "I understand now," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "What you built isn't just about coffee or free meals. It's about mercy, the kind that keeps reaching out even when it hurts, the kind that changes lives." She extended her hand. "I forgive you, and I'd like to come back to work if you'll have me." He shook her hand as the congregation burst into applause. Someone started singing "Amazing Grace," others joining in until the old hymn filled every corner of the hall. That night, Renee sat on her bed, her grandmother's Bible open in her lap. The familiar words of Psalm 23 brought fresh tears. "Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life." For the first time in weeks, she felt peace settle over her like a warm blanket. No tossing and turning, no anxious thoughts about tomorrow, just the quiet certainty that sometimes broken things could be made beautiful again. She fell asleep with the Bible beside her, dreaming of morning light through stained glass windows and the smell of fresh coffee brewing. The morning sun painted golden streaks across Mercy Cafe's freshly washed windows. Renee stood at the entrance, her heart drumming against her ribs. The open sign glowed with renewed promise, like everything was beginning again. She pushed open the door, the familiar bell chiming above. The crowd inside erupted in applause. Regular customers, veterans, and townspeople filled every booth and counter seat. Red-faced, she clutched her apron to her chest as elderly Mrs. Patterson enveloped her in a warm hug that smelled of lavender. "Welcome home, sweetheart," the old woman whispered, patting Renee's cheek. More hugs followed. Coach Williams, the Henderson sisters, even shy Jimmy from the hardware store stepped forward to welcome her back. Their genuine warmth brought tears to her eyes. From the kitchen, Mabel's booming laugh cut through the commotion. "Well, if it isn't our celebrity waitress. Get in here, girl. These eggs won't serve themselves." The familiar routine felt like sliding into a comfortable pair of shoes. Renee tied her apron, checked her notepad, and fell into the rhythm she'd known for years. Only everything felt different now. Lighter, hopeful. Daniel worked alongside everyone, rolling up his sleeves to help with dishes when they got backed up. He'd ditched his usual business attire for jeans and a simple button-down, looking more at home than ever. "Look at Montgomery's favorite power couple," Mabel teased during a quiet moment, loud enough for nearby customers to hear. "You two are better than those TV romance shows." Renee felt her face flush hot. "Mabel, it's not like that." "Mm-hmm," Mabel hummed, unconvinced. "That's why he keeps stealing glances at you every 5 minutes." Daniel, passing by with a bus tub, pretended not to hear, but the tips of his ears turned pink. The regulars at the counter chuckled knowingly. Throughout the morning, people kept coming in with donations for the Meals Paid Forward board. Mr. Chen from the grocery store contributed enough to cover 50 meals. The high school basketball team pooled their allowances to help. Even little Sarah Jenkins broke open her piggy bank, proudly offering $3.25 to help someone who's hungry. Near lunchtime, Daniel called everyone's attention by gently tapping a coffee cup with a spoon. The diner fell quiet, all eyes turning to him. "I'd like to announce something special," he said, his voice carrying to every corner. "Mercy Cafe is establishing the Renee Johnson Scholarship Fund for survivors of violence. Every year, we'll help someone rebuild their life through education or job training." Renee's hand flew to her mouth. The customers burst into applause while she tried to process what she'd just heard. A scholarship? In her name? "Daniel, I don't deserve—" she started when he approached her. "Yes, you do," he said firmly. "Your strength inspired this. Your forgiveness made it possible. The day flew by in a blur of coffee refills, shared smiles, and grateful hearts. But not everyone celebrated their success. Through the window, Renee noticed Travis McCade and his friends gathered across the street, their faces dark with anger. Word had spread that several local businesses were cutting ties with McCade Family Enterprises, choosing instead to partner with Daniel's foundation. The evening wound down slowly, like a music box playing its last notes. As Renee counted out her tips, she noticed Daniel lingering by the register, keys in hand. "Need a ride home?" he asked casually. The offer shouldn't have made her heart skip, but it did. "That would be nice, thank you." His truck was nothing like she'd expected a billionaire to drive, just a clean, older model Ford that smelled faintly of pine. They rode in comfortable silence, streetlights painting stripes across the dashboard. When they reached her apartment, Daniel pulled up under the flickering street lamp, but didn't turn off the engine. For a moment, neither of them moved. "Can I tell you something?" Renee asked softly, watching moths dance around the light above. "Sometimes I'm scared to feel this happy, like it's too good to be true, you know? In my experience, good things, they don't tend to stick around." Daniel turned toward her, his face half in shadow. Slowly, deliberately, he reached over and took her hand. His palm was warm against hers, steady and sure. "Sometimes it does last," he said softly, "if we protect it." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Renee felt the rough calluses on his fingers, so different from what she'd expected. A working man's hands, despite his wealth. Everything about him kept surprising her. Their eyes met in the dim light, and something electric passed between them, unspoken but undeniable. A promise, a possibility. A future neither of them had dared to imagine before. After what felt like forever and no time at all, Daniel squeezed her hand once and let go. Renee stepped out into the night air, her skin still tingling where he'd touched her. She watched his tail lights disappear around the corner, hugging herself against the evening chill. A dark sedan pulled away from the curb further down the street, following the same path Daniel's truck had taken. Its headlights were off. The digital clock by Renee's bed blinked 2 o'clock in the morning when the first siren pierced the quiet night. She stirred, confused by the flickering orange glow dancing across her ceiling. For a moment she thought she was dreaming, until the acrid smell of smoke hit her nose. Her heart stopped. She knew that smell. It haunted her nightmares. Scrambling to her window, Renee's world tilted sideways. Down the street, angry flames reached towards the sky, consuming the building she'd come to love. Mercy Cafe was burning. "No, no, no!" The scream tore from her throat as she bolted for the door, not even stopping to put on shoes. Her feet slapped against the cold pavement as she ran, her nightgown billowing in the hot wind created by the inferno. The heat hit her face like a wall as she got closer. Fire trucks were already there, their red lights painting everything in surreal patterns. Firefighters dragged heavy hoses across the parking lot, shouting orders over the roar of the flames. "Please, you have to save it!" Renee tried to run forward, but strong arms caught her around the waist. "Renee, stop!" It was Daniel, his voice rough with emotion. He'd somehow gotten there just after her, still wearing what looked like pajama pants under his coat. "You can't go near it." She struggled against his grip. "But everything we built, everything we created, is just stuff," he finished firmly, though his own voice cracked. "Things can be replaced. You can't." They stood together, helpless, as the firefighters battled the blaze. The heat was so intense it made the air shimmer. Windows exploded outward, showering glass across the parking lot. The hand-painted sign, "Hope Served Daily," curled and blackened before their eyes. Renee couldn't stop the sobs that racked her body. Daniel's arms tightened around her, and she felt his chest rising and falling rapidly against her back. He was struggling to keep his own composure. More emergency vehicles arrived. Police cars blocked off the street. Neighbors emerged from their homes in robes and slippers, gathering in shocked clusters to watch. Someone brought Renee a blanket, but she barely felt it. Hours crawled by. The flames gradually died down under the relentless assault of water, but the damage was catastrophic. As dawn approached, the full extent of the destruction became clear. Where Mercy Cafe had stood proud just yesterday, only a charred skeleton remained. The walls were still standing, but the interior was gutted. Everything, the new kitchen equipment, the donation board, the freshly painted walls, was gone. The fire chief approached them as his team continued to douse hot spots. "Mr. Mercer, Ms. Johnson, I'm sorry, but this was no accident. We've found evidence of accelerant around the building's perimeter. This was deliberately set." Renee's knees gave out. Daniel caught her before she hit the ground, helping her to sit on the curb. His face had turned to stone, jaw clenched tight. "You'll have our full cooperation in the investigation," he told the fire chief. "Whatever resources you need." Police investigators arrived as the sky began to lighten. They took photos, collected samples, and interviewed witnesses. One officer mentioned that a dark sedan had been seen speeding away from the scene shortly before the fire was discovered. "Just like the car that followed you the other night," Renee whispered, remembering. Daniel's expression darkened further. "Travis McCade drives a black BMW sedan?" The lead investigator made a note. "We'll look into that connection, sir." More people gathered as morning truly arrived. Mabel showed up in tears, hugging Renee tight. Regular customers stood in groups, many crying openly. The local news van pulled up, a reporter already going live with the burning building as her backdrop. Renee sat numbly through it all, Daniel's coat now draped around her shoulders. The smell of smoke clung to everything. Her hair, her skin, her nightgown. It brought back memories of another fire, another scar, another loss. "Everything I love burns," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. "Maybe I'm cursed." Daniel knelt in front of her, forcing her to meet his eyes. "No, you're blessed. You're a survivor. And we're going to rebuild, better than before." "How can you be so sure?" "Because good always wins in the end," he said firmly. "It just takes longer sometimes." The sun finally broke through the lingering smoke, casting long shadows across the parking lot. Renee watched the light catch the water pooling on the ground, creating tiny rainbows. Even in destruction, there was beauty. Even in loss, there was hope. A police officer approached with more questions about Travis McCade and his friends. As Daniel stood to speak with him, Renee pulled his coat tighter around her shoulders, breathing in the familiar scent of his cologne mixed with smoke. The fabric was warm, like his promise to rebuild, like his unwavering faith in justice. She looked at the ruins of Mercy Cafe, remembering all the joy it had contained just yesterday. The laughter of children eating free meals, the grateful tears of veterans finding community, the proud smiles of single mothers able to treat their kids to dinner. All of that seemed lost now, turned to ash and rubble. But as she watched Daniel speaking with the officers, his shoulders straight and determined despite the exhaustion evident in every line of his body, she felt something stir in her chest. Not just grief, but determination. They had built this place once. They could do it again. The morning sun climbed higher, burning away the last wisps of smoke. Its light caught the broken windows, making them glitter like diamonds in the ruins. Nature's reminder that even after the darkest night, dawn always comes. The morning after the fire dawned grey and heavy, as if the whole town was draped in mourning. A thick silence hung over Montgomery's streets, broken only by the crunch of boots on broken glass and charred wood. The air still carried traces of smoke, a bitter reminder of what had been lost. At 7 o'clock, the first volunteers began arriving at the blackened shell of Mercy Cafe. They came with work gloves, shovels, and determination etched on their faces. Some were regular customers, others just townspeople touched by the cafe's mission. Daniel stood at the entrance, clipboard in hand, organizing them into teams. "Safety first," he instructed, his voice steady despite the dark circles under his eyes. "We'll clear the debris section by section. Anyone who wants to help can earn $15 per hour." He pulled out his personal checkbook, showing he meant business. Renee arrived wearing old jeans and a faded t-shirt, her hands wrapped in fresh bandages. The burns from the coffee incident had reopened during yesterday's fire, but she waved away Daniel's concerned look. "I need to be here," she said simply. "This is my home too." Daniel nodded, understanding in his eyes. He handed her a pair of thick work gloves, his fingers lingering on hers for a moment. "Stay close to me today." They worked side by side as the morning wore on. The volunteers formed a human chain, passing debris out to waiting dumpsters. Every piece they removed revealed another memory: melted coffee cups, warped silverware, the remains of tables where countless conversations had taken place. Around noon, Renee stumbled across something that made her heart catch. Half buried in the rubble lay the wooden sign that had hung above the entrance. "Mercy Cafe, hope served daily." The bottom half was charred black, but the top portion still showed traces of the careful paintwork she'd done herself just weeks ago. Her knees gave out. She sank down next to it, tears cutting clean tracks through the soot on her face. Daniel was there in an instant, kneeling beside her in the ashes. "I thought we were finally building something lasting," she whispered, running her fingers over the salvaged letters. "Something that couldn't be taken away." Daniel gently took her bandaged hands in his. "We are," he said firmly. "I promise you, Renee, we'll rebuild this place even if it takes everything I have, every penny, every ounce of strength." His grey eyes held such conviction that she had to believe him. The volunteers worked until sunset, clearing away nearly half the interior debris. As the day wound down, Daniel insisted on driving Renee home. They took a detour, parking his truck on a small hill overlooking the cafe lot. The evening air was cool, and wisps of smoke still rose from the ruins like ghosts. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the last volunteers leave. Finally, Daniel spoke, his voice soft but raw with emotion. "After my mother died in that fire, I lost my faith completely," he admitted. "Not just in God, but in everything. I was 14, angry, convinced the world was nothing but cruelty and injustice." He paused, looking at her profile in the dim light. "But watching you these past weeks, your grace under pressure, your kindness even to those who hurt you, it reminded me why I used to believe." Renee turned to face him, struck by the vulnerability in his expression. "What changed?" "You did," he said simply. "You showed me that real faith isn't about avoiding pain or pretending everything's fine. It's about finding beauty in the broken places and having the courage to rebuild." The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken understanding. Their shared experiences of loss and resilience had forged a bond deeper than either had expected. As night settled over Montgomery, police lights suddenly flashed in the distance. Daniel's phone rang. It was the lead investigator. They'd caught James McCade, Travis's younger brother, lurking around the fire scene with gasoline residue on his shoes. He was being taken in for questioning. "It's starting," Daniel said after hanging up. "The truth is coming out." He drove Renee home, making sure she got safely to her apartment. For the first time since the fire, she felt real peace as she prepared for bed. The weight of fear and uncertainty had lifted slightly, replaced by something that felt like hope. As she drifted off to sleep, Renee could almost hear the phantom sounds of the cafe. Dishes clinking, coffee brewing, children laughing. Not memories, she realized, but promises of what would come again. Her dreams that night were full of rebuilding, of fresh paint and new beginnings, of a community rising stronger from the ashes. The half-burned sign sat propped against her wall, a reminder that hope, like faith, couldn't be destroyed by fire. It could only be refined by it. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the ruins of Mercy Cafe as the first volunteers arrived. 3 days had passed since the fire, and the transformation was already visible. Where there had been charred debris, now stood neat piles of salvaged materials and fresh lumber. Renee arrived just after sunrise, carrying a cooler filled with water bottles and homemade sandwiches. Her bandaged hands still ached, but her heart felt lighter with each passing day. The sight of pickup trucks lining the street, loaded with donated supplies, brought tears to her eyes. "Look what showed up overnight," Daniel called out, walking over with blueprints tucked under his arm. He pointed to a stack of premium hardwood flooring. "The Henderson brothers from the lumberyard sent it. Said they remember your grandmother always being kind to them when they were kids." Renee smiled, remembering how her grandmother used to slip extra pie to anyone who looked hungry. Kindness comes back around, doesn't it? Throughout the morning, more helpers arrived. Veterans in worn baseball caps worked alongside church ladies in practical shoes. Mr. Chen from the grocery store brought cases of sports drinks. Even some of the town's wealthiest residents, who'd initially sided with the McCades, showed up in work clothes. Renee moved among them all, distributing water and encouragement. She knew everyone's names, remembered their coffee orders, asked about their families. Daniel watched her from across the site, noticing how naturally people gravitated toward her leadership. "You know," he said during their lunch break, "you've got a gift for this. Would you consider managing the reopening project?" Renee nearly choked on her sandwich. "Me? But I'm just a waitress." "You're far more than that," Daniel replied firmly. "You understand this community better than anyone. They trust you." Before she could respond, a small commotion drew their attention. 10-year-old Tommy Parker stood nervously at the edge of the construction site, clutching something behind his back. Renee recognized him as one of the boys who used to make fun of her scars. "Go on," his mother urged gently from a few feet away. Tommy shuffled forward, then thrust out his hand. In it was a slightly crushed daisy. "My mama says you're brave," he whispered, face red. "And I'm sorry for being mean before." Renee knelt down and accepted the flower with a warm smile. "Thank you, Tommy. That means a lot to me." The boy scampered back to his mother, but not before giving Renee a tiny smile. As the days passed, more stories like Tommy's emerged. People who'd once avoided eye contact now stopped to chat. The local paper, which had printed cruel gossip about Daniel and Renee, ran a front-page story titled "Rising from the Ashes: How Mercy Cafe Changed Our Town." Even the national media shifted their tone. News outlets that had mocked Daniel's publicity stunt now praised his commitment to community healing. One evening, he showed Renee a magazine article on his phone. "Billionaire's small-town investment sparks social revolution," she read aloud, shaking her head. "They make it sound so grand." "The truth is usually simpler," Daniel agreed, "and more beautiful." The McCade's influence was fading fast. Constance McCade, who'd once ruled local society with an iron grip, found herself increasingly isolated. Her carefully cultivated image as a philanthropist crumbled as more people came forward with stories of her family's past misdeeds. 1 week into rebuilding, The crew stayed late to install strings of construction lights. The warm bulbs created a magical atmosphere against the twilight sky. Someone's truck radio played an old country song, the melody drifting across the lot. Daniel appeared at Renee's side, holding out his hand. "May I have this dance?" She laughed, but let him pull her into a gentle sway. Other workers smiled, pretending not to watch. The music wrapped around them like a soft blanket as they moved in slow circles. "You know what I've learned?" Daniel murmured near her ear. "Mercy built this town, Renee, not money. All those years I thought I needed wealth to make a difference, but it was really about this. People helping people." Renee rested her head against his shoulder, understanding completely. They danced until the song ended, neither wanting to let go first. As the evening deepened, a truck arrived carrying the new diner sign. The crew gathered to watch it being lifted into place. Fresh paint gleamed in the construction lights. Mercy Cafe, hope served daily. Daniel and Renee stood side by side, their shoulders touching, as the sign rose against the purple dusk. Someone started clapping, and others joined in. The sound echoed off the neighboring buildings like a promise, not just of a rebuilt cafe, but of a community reborn. The sign settled into place with a solid thunk. In its light, Renee could see tears in Daniel's eyes, matching her own. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. Everything that mattered was right there in the gentle evening air, in the warmth of shoulders touching, in the sound of their town coming together to build something beautiful from the ashes of hate. Workers began packing up their tools for the night, calling out goodbyes. The strings of lights twinkled overhead like earthbound stars. Tomorrow would bring more work, more challenges, more healing. But for now, in this moment, hope felt as solid as the new foundation beneath their feet. The morning sun painted Montgomery's sky in shades of pink and gold as a line of people wrapped around the newly rebuilt Mercy Cafe. The crowd stretched for nearly 2 blocks, everyone buzzing with excitement for the grand reopening. Renee stood at the entrance, smoothing her crisp new uniform, a soft blue dress with a white apron, the cafe's logo embroidered over her heart. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her name tag. This moment felt surreal, like stepping into a dream she never dared to imagine. "You ready?" Daniel appeared beside her, his storm-grey eyes warm with pride. She took a deep breath, inhaling the heavenly aroma of fresh biscuits and coffee wafting through the doors. "I think I am." At exactly 7 o'clock in the morning, Daniel stepped forward to address the waiting crowd. His presence commanded attention without demanding it, a quiet authority that made people lean in to listen. "Good morning, Montgomery," he began, his voice carrying across the hushed gathering. 2 months ago, someone tried to burn down more than just a building. They tried to destroy hope itself. He paused, his eyes scanning the faces before him. But what they didn't understand was that hope isn't made of wood and nails. It's made of people. People like you, who showed up day after day to rebuild not just a cafe, but a community. Renee watched as heads nodded in agreement. She spotted Mabel in the crowd, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. Daniel continued, his voice growing stronger. "Today, we're dedicating this building to every soul who's ever been burned but refused to stop shining, to every person who's faced darkness but chose to be light, to every heart that's known pain but decided to serve hope instead of hatred." Thunder-like applause erupted from the crowd. Several veterans in the front row stood at attention, their eyes glistening with tears. "Ladies and gentlemen," Daniel said, turning to gesture at the doors, "welcome to the new Mercy Cafe." As the doors swung open, gasps of delight filled the air. The interior had been completely transformed. Warm wooden tables gleamed beneath pendant lights that cast a gentle glow. The walls, painted in soft cream and sage green, featured dozens of framed photographs, snapshots of community members who had helped rebuild, caught in moments of laughter and determination. Renee's heart swelled as she watched people point to their own pictures, explaining to others when each was taken. There was Mr. Johnson, the retired carpenter, showing his grandchildren the day he installed the new hardwood floors. Mrs. Rodriguez from the flower shop, beaming beside the hanging baskets she'd donated. Even Tommy Parker and his mother appeared in one photo, painting baseboards together. The breakfast rush moved like a well-orchestrated dance. Mabel's biscuits emerged from the kitchen in golden brown perfection, accompanied by steaming cups of coffee and plates of fluffy scrambled eggs. The new staff, carefully chosen for their hearts as much as their skills, moved efficiently between tables, treating each guest like family. Local news crews captured it all, their cameras focusing on the faces of contentment rather than controversy. One reporter interviewed an elderly veteran who spoke through happy tears about finally having a place where he felt welcomed and valued. "This isn't just about food," he said, his weathered hands wrapped around a coffee mug. "It's about dignity, about being seen." Around noon, Renee stepped outside for a moment of air. The autumn breeze felt cool against her flushed cheeks. That's when she noticed Daniel in serious conversation with several city officials near the corner of the building. Curious, she moved closer, catching fragments of their discussion. "The scholarship fund will provide full tuition and living expenses," Daniel was saying. "Priority given to survivors of violence and trauma. We're naming it the Renee Johnson Hope Foundation." Renee's hand flew to her mouth as tears sprang to her eyes. Daniel noticed her presence and smiled softly, excusing himself from the officials. "I was going to tell you tonight," he said, approaching her. "But since you're here, what do you think about helping other people find their second chances?" She couldn't speak for a moment, overcome with emotion. Finally, she managed to whisper, "Daniel, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll help run it," he replied. "Nobody knows better than you what it means to rise from ashes." As evening settled over Montgomery, the cafe transformed again. String lights twinkled overhead as a local jazz band set up in the corner. The smell of coffee mingled with the aroma of fresh-baked pie as the dinner crowd filled every table. Laughter, real, genuine laughter, echoed off the walls where whispers of cruelty once lived. Renee watched as former enemies shared tables, as old wounds began to heal over plates of comfort food and cups of kindness. Standing in the doorway, she caught her reflection in the window. Behind her, the new neon sign cast its gentle glow, the words "Mercy Cafe, Hope Served Daily," painting her face in soft blue and warm gold. In her eyes, she saw what Daniel had seen all along, not a victim, but a victor. Not just a waitress, but a warrior. Not someone broken by fire, but someone transformed by it, like gold refined in flames. The music swelled, carrying notes of jazz and joy into the Alabama night. Inside, Daniel chatted with customers, his sleeves rolled up, looking more at home than she'd ever seen him. He caught her eye across the room and smiled, a smile that spoke of shared battles and shared victories, of pain transformed into purpose. Renee touched her name tag, tracing the letters with her finger. Above her, the neon sign hummed softly, its light a beacon in the gathering dusk. Hope, she realized, wasn't just served here. It was lived here, breathed here, shared here. And like the sign above her head, it would keep shining long after the last customer left, a reminder that even the darkest night couldn't extinguish the light of mercy. The late September breeze carried the sweet scent of magnolia blossoms through downtown Montgomery. 3 weeks had passed since Mercy Cafe's grand reopening, and the rhythm of daily life had settled into something beautiful and unexpected. Every morning, the cafe buzzed with a different kind of energy than before. Gone were the whispers of judgment and the weight of fear. Instead, laughter floated between tables like music, punctuated by the gentle clink of coffee cups and the scrape of forks against plates. Renee moved through her shifts with a newfound confidence, her smile genuine and warm. She knew every regular by name now, not just as customers, but as family. There was Mrs. Thompson, who came in every Tuesday morning with her 3 children after her night shift at the hospital. Their breakfast was always complimentary, served with extra helpings of bacon and encouraging words. Old Joe, a Vietnam veteran with weathered hands and kind eyes, had claimed the corner booth as his own. He spent hours there, sharing war stories with younger veterans who found their way to the cafe. Sometimes they cried together, these strong men who had seen too much. Other times they laughed until their sides hurt, healing in the simple act of being understood. The transformation went beyond just the people. The cafe itself seemed to glow with purpose. Fresh flowers adorned every table, donated weekly by Mrs. Rodriguez's shop. Local artists had contributed paintings that lined the walls, depicting scenes of hope and redemption. Even the old jukebox in the corner played a carefully curated selection of songs that spoke of better days. Daniel had become a fixture too, though he tried to stay in the background. He would arrive early each morning, helping to prep the kitchen alongside Mabel, who never missed a chance to tease him about his improving coffee-making skills. His suit jackets had given way to casual button-downs, his corporate polish softening into something more authentic. The way he looked at Renee hadn't gone unnoticed by the staff or regular customers. It wasn't just admiration or attraction. It was something deeper, more reverent. They shared quiet moments between rushes, their conversations flowing easily now, though neither had put words to the feelings growing between them. One particularly peaceful evening, after the dinner crowd had thinned and the sky had turned to velvet, Daniel found Renee sitting outside on the cafe's new wooden bench. She was gazing up at the stars, lost in thought. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked softly, settling beside her with 2 steaming cups of coffee. Renee accepted one with a grateful smile. "Just thinking about how much has changed. Sometimes I have to remind myself this isn't a dream." The street was quiet, except for the gentle hum of crickets and the distant whistle of a train. Above them, the cafe's sign cast a warm glow, its letters promising mercy to all who passed by. "You know," Renee continued, her voice thoughtful, "I used to be so angry. When I first got these scars—" She touched her arm unconsciously. "I thought the hate would eat me alive. I wanted the men who did this to suffer like I suffered." Daniel listened intently, his grey eyes full of understanding. "But now?" She shook her head slowly. "I pray for them. Every night. Even Travis and his friends who tried to burn down the cafe. Isn't that strange?" "Not strange," Daniel replied. "Extraordinary." He set his coffee down carefully. "Forgiveness doesn't excuse what they did, Renee. It doesn't make their actions okay or erase the pain they caused, but it frees your heart from carrying that burden." "Is that how you did it?" she asked softly. "With the people who covered up your mother's accident?" Daniel was quiet for a long moment, gathering his thoughts. "It took years," he admitted. "And some days it's still a choice I have to make. But yes, forgiveness was the key to moving forward, to building something good out of something terrible." Their conversation was interrupted by the approach of 2 police officers. Renee recognized Officer Martinez from the night of the fire. His expression was serious but satisfied. "Ms. Johnson, Mr. Mercer," he greeted them. "We wanted to deliver this news in person. Travis McCade and his accomplices have been officially charged, both for the arson and the original assault against Ms. Johnson, The district attorney is confident about the case." Renee's hand trembled slightly as she set down her coffee cup. After all these weeks of uncertainty, justice was finally arriving. Not in the form of revenge, but through proper channels, through the system working as it should. "Thank you," Daniel said firmly, speaking for both of them. The officers nodded and departed, leaving Renee and Daniel alone, again under the starlit sky. Tears slipped silently down Renee's cheeks as she closed her eyes. "Thank you, Lord," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Daniel reached over and took her hand, his touch gentle but sure. Their fingers intertwined naturally, as if they'd been doing this for years instead of mere moments. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. In the distance, the old town bell began to chime, its deep tones rolling across the sleeping streets of Montgomery. 9 steady rings marked the hour, each one seeming to speak of endings and beginnings, of closure and rebirth, of mercy that makes all things new. They sat there together, hand in hand, as the bell's echoes faded into the night. The cafe's sign continued its steady glow above them, a beacon of hope in the darkness, promising that tomorrow would bring another day of serving mercy, of healing hearts, of building something beautiful from the ashes of the past. The evening settled around them like a gentle blessing, full of peace and possibility. In the warmth of their shared silence, both Renee and Daniel understood that some things don't need labels to be real. Some healing doesn't need words to be complete, and some love stories write themselves in the quiet moments between heartbeats. Above them, the stars continued their ancient dance across the Alabama sky, witnesses to yet another story of redemption unfolding in their eternal light. Sunlight poured through Mercy Cafe's spotless windows, painting golden stripes across the freshly polished floor. The early morning air hummed with anticipation as a line of customers stretched around the corner, their chatter mixing with bird song and the distant church bells. Inside, warmth from the kitchen mingled with the rich aroma of coffee and fresh-baked biscuits. The renovated space gleamed with purpose, every surface telling a story of renewal. Photos of community volunteers lined the walls, their smiling faces a testament to unity born from adversity. Renee moved between tables with practiced grace, her steps light and sure. The burn scars on her arm had faded to silvery trails, no longer a mark of shame, but a badge of survival. She knew every face, every name, every regular order by heart. "Good morning, Mr. Phillips," she called to an elderly veteran settling into his usual corner booth. "Your coffee's already brewing. 2 sugars, touch of cream." "Bless you, child," he replied with a wave. At another table, she bent down to high-five 6-year-old Sarah, whose mother had once been too proud to accept help, but now volunteered at the cafe's weekly food drive. "Someone's got a loose tooth," Renee observed, making the little girl beam. Daniel sat at the counter, dressed casually in a blue button-down shirt with rolled-up sleeves. His quiet presence had become as much a part of the cafe as the gleaming coffee machines and worn recipe cards. He watched Renee work, noting how she carried herself with newfound confidence, head high, shoulders straight, smile genuine. The morning rush swelled and ebbed like a tide. Mabel orchestrated the kitchen with her usual mix of efficiency and sass, calling out orders and keeping the younger staff in line with good-natured teasing. The rebuilt kitchen sparkled with state-of-the-art equipment, though she still insisted on using her ancient cast-iron skillet for the signature biscuits. "Order up!" Mabel's voice rang out above the din. "Table 12's chicken and waffles." Renee delivered plate after plate, refilled countless coffee cups, and shared dozens of smiles. Her connection with the customers went deeper than mere service. She remembered their stories, their struggles, their small victories. Many of them had stood beside her during the cafe's darkest days, and now they shared in its resurrection. Finally, as the breakfast rush began to settle, Renee approached the counter where Daniel sat. She carried a steaming plate of her own, the first proper meal either of them had managed all morning. The special of the day, pecan-crusted French toast with fresh berries, arranged with artistic care. Well, well, Daniel teased as she set the plate before him. Do I finally get the special treatment? Renee's eyes softened as she looked at him, remembering all the moments that had led them here, from that first envelope of cash to the night they watched their dreams go up in flames, and every step of rebuilding that followed. You already did, she replied softly, her voice carrying years of meaning. You reminded me I'm worth more than what was done to me. Daniel's expression grew tender, his usual reserved manner melting away. You reminded me what faith looks like, he answered, the words falling between them like a gentle truth. Behind the counter, Mabel rang the service bell with deliberate enthusiasm, breaking the moment. Less googly eyes, more coffee refills, she called out, but her broad smile betrayed her joy at their happiness. Laughter rippled through the cafe, warm and genuine. Sunlight continued to stream through the windows, catching the dust motes in golden beams. The space buzzed with life and possibility. Veterans sharing stories over coffee, young mothers enjoying a moment of peace, business people and laborers sitting side by side at the counter. Outside, the new sign stood proud against the morning sky. Mercy Cafe, hope served daily. Its letters a promise kept, a dream realized. The words meant something different now, something deeper than just a name or a slogan. They spoke of second chances, of community, of love that builds instead of destroys. Renee's smile, radiant and free, lit up her entire face as she moved back into the rhythm of the morning. Her steps were light, her heart full. This was more than just a fresh start. It was life beginning anew, seasoned with mercy, garnished with grace, and served with abundant hope. The cafe hummed with warmth and chatter, a symphony of clinking plates and comfortable conversation. Through the windows, the Alabama sun continued its ascent, blessing another day of new beginnings at Mercy Cafe. The evening sun dipped low over Montgomery, painting the sky in shades of amber and violet as day surrendered to dusk. At Mercy Cafe, the dinner rush had settled into a gentle murmur, leaving behind the comforting aroma of fresh-baked pie and coffee. Renee Johnson stood on the cafe's front porch steps, her apron still tied neatly around her waist, drinking in the peaceful moment as the horizon blazed with golden light. Through the windows behind her, warm laughter spilled out into the evening air. Mabel's distinctive voice rose above the quiet chatter, teasing one of their regular veterans about his poker hand. Now, Harold, you can't fool me with that face. I've been serving you coffee too long not to know when you're bluffing. Daniel moved between the tables inside, coffee pot in hand, topping off cups despite protests from the customers. Mr. Mercer, sir, you shouldn't be doing this. You own the place, one woman insisted. The boss shouldn't work this hard. Another chimed in. Daniel just smiled, continuing his rounds with the same humble determination he'd shown since day one. Everyone works at Mercy Cafe, he'd always say. That's what makes it special. Standing there in the fading light, Renee felt something shift inside her heart. For the first time since she could remember, peace didn't feel like a fragile thing that might shatter at any moment. This peace felt solid, earned through fire and rebuilt with love. The screen door creaked softly as Daniel stepped out onto the porch, carrying 2 steaming mugs of coffee. He handed one to Renee, their fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. Without a word, they sat side by side on the worn wooden steps, letting the evening settle around them like a comfortable blanket. A gentle breeze stirred the newly planted flowers that lined the cafe's entrance. Bright marigolds, purple petunias, and cheerful daisies. Renee remembered how just months ago, some of these same townspeople who had donated the flowers would cross the street to avoid her. Now, as families headed home for the night, children waved goodbye with bright smiles. "See you tomorrow, Miss Renee," they called out. The whole community's different now. Renee mused softly, warming her hands around her coffee mug. Daniel nodded, taking a thoughtful sip before speaking. "The scholarship fund is already making waves," he said. "We're getting letters from women all across the state who saw the story about Mercy Cafe on television." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. This one came today. She wrote, "If she could forgive, maybe I can live again." Renee's eyes welled up with tears, and she quickly wiped them away with the corner of her apron. The weight of what they'd built here, what they'd overcome, settled over her like a warm embrace. As the night deepened and stars began to peek through the darkening sky, Daniel stood up and disappeared briefly inside. He returned carrying a small, framed photograph, a black-and-white image of a woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile, wearing a waitress uniform not unlike Renee's own. With careful movements, he hung the frame near the cafe door, right beside the sign that read, "Hope Served Daily." Renee rose and moved closer, touching the frame with gentle fingers. Linda Mercer's face seemed to glow in the porch light, her expression full of the same quiet strength she'd passed on to her son. "She'd be proud," Renee whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Daniel's hand found its way to her shoulder, squeezing gently. "So would your grandmother," he replied, his voice low and sincere. As closing time approached, Renee made her final walk through the dining room. She touched each table, each chair, her fingers trailing along surfaces that once held only memories of pain and humiliation. Now these same spaces cradled purpose and hope, filled with the laughter of children, the grateful smiles of veterans, the quiet conversations of healing hearts. The bell above the Dauber chimed softly as she moved through the room, turning off lights one by one. Each click of a switch dimmed another corner until only the soft glow from outside illuminated the space. Through the windows, the neon sign cast a gentle blue and red glow across the hardwood floors. Outside, Daniel waited patiently, his hand extended toward her. Renee took it without hesitation, their fingers intertwining naturally, comfortably. Together they walked down the quiet street, their footsteps echoing softly against the sidewalk as street lamps cast pools of golden light around them. Behind them, the cafe windows reflected their silhouettes, two souls who had carried the weight of fire and found mercy instead. The neon sign hummed gently in the night air, its message glowing steady and true. Mercy Cafe, hope served daily. Around them, Montgomery slept peacefully, its heart beating strong again, transformed by the power of forgiveness and the simple grace of serving hope, one cup of coffee at a time. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.